Good evening. Welcome to Matinee Free Webinar. Today the speakers, Mr. Ray and Mr. Matt, they are both experts in EQ as well as positive mental health. And they have so many years of experience. Particularly, Mr. Ray have more than 35 years of experience in positive mental health. And Matt, he's became the ambassador of emotional intelligence. And today we are discussing about EQ and PMS for kids. And we are expecting a series, kids, teens like that. So today, I welcome both of you on behalf of all others.
Thank you. Thank you.
So
thank you for having us.
All right. Well, we appreciate you guys having us. We love talking about this subject. It's a very, very important subject. We think we have some basic concepts and ideas and steps that we've developed over the years that could be very, very helpful for kids, for teens, for adults too. They're not really that much different actually. And so we're trying to get them organized. We're developing this whole new concept called positive mental health. And we're trying to get it into a way that people can go, oh, I think that's one of the main things that we want from people to go, oh, what do you think, Ray? I go, yeah, I see what you mean.
You know, the first time someone told me it's your choice how I want to feel, I was like, what? Why? You know, I was almost 40 years old and I was a psych major in college, and when he told me that, I'm like, why didn't somebody tell me this sooner? You know, why am I 40
what you want for the kids?
First telling me this?
Is that what you want for the kids now, is to be able to go, what? Really?
Well, most of the times when I speak to kids, I had one kid who had a history of suicide, came up after the presentation. I didn't even know it was him. And he came up and said, this was life-changing. You know, now it's a long way from him believing it's life-changing to really, having it work for him. It's going to take a lot of practice and rehearsal, but, just to have somebody like that, a 14, 15-year-old kid come up and say that, that's
great. Exactly. This is life-changing stuff, and it's life-saving stuff. I've counted 11 people that I know of personally that have come up to me or my wife and said this not only changed my life, but it saved my life. So so that's one of the reasons. That's what gets me out of bed early in the morning, gets me fired up about this, and we want to share it and explain it to people. And it's not rocket science. This is not rocket science. This is not anything particularly difficult. Excuse me, it's not complicated. It is sometimes very difficult. It's not complicated, but it's difficult sometimes. So we want to try to explain it as simply and easy as we can, so people go, oh, that's the main thing I'm looking for. Oh, I see. That makes a lot of sense. So anyway, let's go ahead and give that a shot, shall we? I'm going to share my screen, and I'll give you some of the basics of positive mental health, and then we'll switch over to Ray, and Ray's going to give you some amazing, super simple, super clear steps that people can take, and shifts in mindset. That's all most of it is a shift, right, Ray? It's just an adjustment in how we think. I call it spin it to win it. We're adjusting what we think so we feel better and we do better, and a lot of things go better if we can adjust what we think, right? Okay, here goes. Guess it'd be handy to start at the beginning, right? So can you see my screen?
It's coming.
Yeah.
It's coming.
All right, let's start at the beginning, shall we? All right, here we go. This is PMH, Positive Mental Health for Kids and Teens. We want to introduce you to positive mental health if you haven't heard about it before. It starts with emotional intelligence. That's what we're doing. Emotional intelligence is a very popular word now. A lot of people are now starting to figure out how important this is. Positive mental health, however, is a kind of bigger strategies. It's how to put emotional intelligence to work in your life. real practical, day-to-day, minute-by-minute stuff that we can think about and feel about, that can make all the difference, because EQ gives us choices. PMH says which choices to choose, right? So concepts, thought patterns, attitudes that we're talking about that can improve all of our lives, our feelings, our emotions, our mental health, all of it. And it's all basically free stuff that's already inside of us. We just don't know how to use it. So we're trying to figure out some cool ways to explain to people how to use it, because we don't learn about this stuff in school, and we don't talk about it. We don't learn about it. We don't deal with it. Most people have no idea how to deal with their emotions. And so we're trying to sum it up for people. Our call to action for you guys is to learn it, practice it, model it, and share it. Please, please. I feel like it's our responsibility, since most people don't know, and they don't know that they don't know. They can't ask for it, right? And they're not actively looking for it a lot of the times. We got to go jump up and down and go, hey, this is important. Our emotions are way more important than we ever imagined. So let's learn about them, shall we? Let's learn some about them. Luckily, Ray and I have been working on this for an awfully long time, and so we're saying, look, you guys, this is some real simple stuff that you do need to know. And so here it is. You didn't know this before. Your parents didn't know it. Our parents didn't know. It's not that they didn't, they were mean to us. They just didn't know. And so they couldn't teach us. Our teachers didn't know. And so they couldn't teach us. So now we're saying, hey, this is a big deal. It's a big deal. It starts with 3 basic steps: awareness. We got to be aware first. Acceptance. We don't gotta do any of these, actually, by the way. They're all optional, but it helps. Let me put it that way. It helps a lot if we are aware of ourselves, of what's going on inside of our own body, our own heart and mind. It so much helps to be aware. Most people are not, especially that there's a difference between thoughts and feelings, and they need to be handled differently. They're different beasts, and they need to be handled differently, and we need to balance both of them. And to do that, we got to be aware first, right? We don't know if we don't know, we can't do anything. Second, acceptance. Doesn't seem like that big a deal, but it is. It's a huge deal. We have to accept that, in my opinion, the number one acceptance is accepting that those thoughts and feelings that we have, we made. They didn't make us angry. They didn't hurt our feelings. We did that. And that is the best news I've ever had. And that's called emotional responsibility, is what I call it. Ray calls it an internal locus of control. It's a very, very big deal. It's kind of the basics of this whole thing, in my opinion, that if you can take charge and take responsibility for your own self and your own thoughts and feelings, then you can do some amazing things with your life. You can be powerful, you can be successful, you can make things happen, you can be much, much happier, you can have positive mental health. If you think they did it to you, if you think they make you mad and they hurt your feelings, and it's the outside world, and it's your parents and school and the environment and the government and the president and all this stuff, if they did it to you, you're going to be probably a whiner, a blamer, and a victim, and that is no fun, and your life is not going to go all that well, or at least inside. So accepting emotional responsibility and internal locus control, big deal. Ray's going to talk more about this in a little bit. And then once we're aware and we accept, then we can then take some conscious action or conscious no action, which is a really good action. And a lot of times, especially with high emotions, is to take no action. But the cool part is we are choosing the action, being conscious and aware. So those are the basic steps. I like to start off with this basic feeling check-in, we call it. It's the first 2 steps of positive mental health, right in one shot, in a couple of seconds. We ask ourselves, what am I feeling? What are you feeling? And will you accept those? That's the 2 first steps right now. Okay, what are you feeling? Name it to tame it. It helps to know what the heck you're feeling. It's step 1 of the whole thing. What am I feeling, right? Being aware of it, identifying, understanding what's going on inside of at least to ourselves, and knowing that we can have more than one feeling at a time, and knowing that we can change them. That's the big deal. We can change them. Whatever they are, we can change them. We're in charge of them. They didn't do it to us, right? This is one of the graphics that we use in schools, but we're basically saying, and stop for a second right now. I'll shut up for a second and say, what is it? What are you feeling right now? And do you accept that? Cool. That's it. That's it. This is not rocket science. Like I said, it's simple, but it's so powerful. It's so profound, and there's so much you can do with it. And you're so much in trouble if you don't know. If you don't know what you're feeling, come on, just find out. You got to learn. You got to practice. And it's a mushy thing. It's unscientific. Well, it's scientific how it becomes there, but what it is and identifying and stuff is kind of weird because it's just between you and you. But it's really important that we understand ourselves and know what's going on. And if we accept emotional responsibility, then we know that we are in charge of ourselves. We're in charge of ourselves. And that is super good news to me. No matter what happens outside of us, we have the power to control what happens inside of us. That is super good news. So emotional intelligence is the concepts, language, and skills. They never stop. They keep going until they never end until we do. They're 24/7, 365, every second of every day for the rest of our lives. They're hit every area of our lives. They're not taught in schools. They're uncomfortable. So sometimes we got to deal with that. We got to be brave. Some of this stuff is really uncomfortable, but if you can be comfortable being uncomfortable, you can deal with all your emotions. And I believe that lack of EQ is dangerous actually, that people are hurting themselves and others because of their lack of emotional intelligence. They don't know how to deal with their feelings. They think that they need to deal with their anger, especially like in the United States. They got to go, oh, I deal with my anger the way other people, the way I was done to me, or that I imagine that I'm going to stop something or hurt somebody, and they go out and shoot a bunch of people, or they shoot themselves, and that's all a lack of emotional intelligence. So it's dangerous to not have emotional intelligence. It seriously is. So what we can do with that is we call positive mental health. We can adjust it. We can work with it. The EQ gives us choices. It tells us what it is going on inside of us. The positive mental health says, how do we use it? So which choices do we choose? Which ones? And the goal is peace. The goal is peace. We have a nonprofit, EQ4PEACE, that EQ, emotional intelligence for peace. That's the point. We're trying to get to inner peace inside of us, interpersonal peace between us, and social peace among us. We can learn. Those are all learnable, teachable skills. And someday, maybe someday, we can get big peace if we teach enough people how to be peaceful inside of themselves. It's strategies. It's teaching us emotionally healthy internal and external management. We got to get good at dealing with our negatives. We got to get good at dealing with our fear, anger, and sadness in particular. Once we can deal with those, then we could do most anything, because there just ain't much that life can throw at us that we can't handle if we can deal with our fear, anger, and sadness. Those in particular, right? The big three, I call them. So if we get good at those, then we can spin them, we can adjust them, we can manage our inner life, and we can create positives out of nothing. We can create positives. So PMH gives us the power to control our lives, and it gives us choices. So here's a little graphic. I like this. I was working on it this morning. So I noticed that we're taking the negatives, right? We're taking the negatives and we're adjusting them to positives. Well, that's kind of a smile, right? So this is how to turn your frown upside down. I was playing with it this morning. Anyway, you get the idea. You got to learn how to do our negatives, and then we can make more positives. That's how we make more positives. That's the concept of positive psychology, and it's the concept of positive mental health as well. Emotional intelligence, it gives us the biggest thing, in my opinion. The biggest thing is emotional responsibility. We take that, put it into positive mental health, and create peace out of it. Create peace all the way up. So emotional intelligence can lead to world peace. Isn't that cool? I think that's our pathway to peace, and that's the point of our nonprofit. So here we go. Ray Mathis, dun, 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 the moment we've been waiting for. Here he comes.
Let me
ladies
just,
and germs.
I'll share my screen, okay?
Sharing it, off you go. There we go.
There we
All
go.
right.
Let me get mine up here.
You guys get ready to take some notes, because this is good stuff. I was reading through his PowerPoint this morning. I took a whole bunch of notes myself. So this is for my learning as well. Go, Ray.
Okay, I just gotta find slideshow.
F5, I think.
There you go. There you go. Okay, so Matt gave you the title here.
Hey.
I've worked with 14-year-olds for 33 years and another almost 20 now since then, since I retired from the classroom. So hopefully I got a pretty good handle on what goes on with them. Now, one of the things I did was create an acronym to help people, especially teachers like myself, understand what kids, children and teens struggle with. And it's ESP, estrangement, shame, and powerlessness. Now, that's especially true for troublesome students in schools or LGBTQ students, people who suffer bullying, end up taking their own lives, or school shooters. Every time they debrief us on what happened and why these things happen, you'll find those three things: estrangement, shame, and powerlessness were true for those people. Now, estrangement, we're hearing a lot now about loneliness in students, especially since the pandemic when schools were shut down. Well, that tends to come from estrangement. They feel estranged, they don't feel connected to what's going on. Now, the powerlessness, where that comes from, is they tend to struggle to feel better, to feel they want the way they want to feel. And they also struggle to defend themselves against others' comments and also to have their lives play out the way they want. And all these things are more likely if they've had abusive peers or adults in their lives. Now, shame is a very simple formula for it. It comes from believing that you're not living up to expectations. And many times that's often because young kids especially are told in so many ways that they're not living up to expectations. Grades, for example, would be a simple way. Now, children and teens have all kinds of expectations placed on them, and they probably place more on themselves. We do the same thing. What that means is plenty of opportunities to feel like you're not living up to expectations and then to feel shame. And that's why I think shame is probably much more pervasive in schools and kids and teenagers than most adults probably realize. Now, I'm talking about anxiety just for a second, because anxiety is another emotion children and teens often struggle with. And that's especially true if they've had some traumatic life experience. I almost died twice before I was 10 years old, and another 3 times when I was in my 20s because of asthma. So understandably, I had some anxiety about death and dying. Now, anxiety, important thing to know about that is it's a figment of imagination. What we mean by that is it's about things that could happen but haven't happened yet, and often never do. We've all worried about things that were going to happen that never did throughout our lives. Now, to put this in perspective, though, the ability to imagine potential threats ahead of time has helped human beings survive and thrive. Now, if kids experience early trauma, it's perfectly understandable that they would become hyper-vigilant and always on guard, always looking for something, and become overly anxious. Now, an anxiety disorder basically means you always look at the frequency, intensity, and duration of the emotions you generate. And obviously, an anxiety disorder, you end up having a greater frequency, intensity, and duration than is necessary or helpful. And another way to explain it or describe it is you spend too much time in your imagination in the future tense. Now, anxiety also plays a role in asthma. I had asthma as a kid, so I can attest to this. And the inability to breathe is a primal threat. So anxiety about having an attack can actually become a self-fulfilling prophecy. You can literally precipitate an attack because you start to get anxious about having one. Now, shame also and anxiety are also connected, because if you believe you aren't living up to expectations and haven't in the past, it's easier to imagine you won't do that again in the future. So it can precipitate anxiety. Now, in order to explain this a little bit better, I like to introduce the concept of symbolic self. It's the person we want to be and be seen as by others. Now, being told and believing you aren't living up to expectations is a threat to this symbolic self. It's not, you're basically somebody's telling me I'm not the person I want to be or be seen as by others. Now, the problem is the brain treats a perceived threat to the symbolic self the same as a threat to life and limb. And that can magnify the perceived threat all out of proportion to reality, and needlessly magnifies the frequency, intensity, and duration of not only shame, but anxiety as well. Now, that's why in kids, name calling, insults, and put downs can end up feeling like a threat to their life and limb. And when we were kids, we were taught sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me. But now we're actually teaching kids that words hurt. So we're actually making it worse in some ways instead of better. What they told us as kids was actually true. You know, it's not somebody calling you a name's not the same, should not be treated on the same level as a threat to your life or limb. Now, this is where we get into fear of failure, where everyday activities and challenges can become quite threatening for kids. Now, I used to always tell teachers, when you're dealing with trouble or troublesome kids, you can get three basic things when they struggle with shame or anxiety. You get turtles who suck into their shells, rabbits who want to run and bolt, and then you get rattlesnakes who coil, rattle, and sometimes even strike out with venom, like a kid cussing at you. And I always think of the movie Breakfast Club with John Bender. John Bender was a rattlesnake, and they're very tough to deal with as a teacher or parent. And it's easy for teachers and parents to take offense at what the rattlers do when they strike out with venom. But it's important to remember, just like real rattlesnakes, everything they do is defensive in nature. It's because they feel threatened. Their symbolic self is feeling threatened. Now, there's a movie on right now called 1923 on Amazon Prime, and stars Helen Mirren and Harrison Ford. And there's this one scene just recently where Helen Mirren lashes out at Harrison Ford and his nephew. And after she leaves the room, you know, his nephew's like, "What did we do? What did we do?" And Harrison Ford says, "She's not angry, she's scared," which is exactly, I mean, she's a rattlesnake. She's feeling threatened and she lashed out. Now, shame is often the primary feeling teens seek relief from alcohol, drugs, by shutting down in school, dropping out, or even suicide. Now, shame also causes children and teens to keep what they think and feel and what they struggle with a secret, or maybe who they are in the case of LGBTQ kids. And they're less likely to seek or accept help that is available to them. Now, keeping secrets is very important because it can end tragically. And the reason is it allows them to repeat irrational thoughts to themselves without the challenge they might get if said out loud. If they said these things out loud, somebody might question them, but they're doing it to themselves. They do what we call ruminating, where like kind of like a cow chewing the food over and over again. That causes irrational thoughts to become automatic, because simple repetition will make thoughts, feelings, and even behaviors automatic. And what happens then is simple opinions about themselves, others in life, start to seem like facts, givens, or truths. And simple imaginations start to feel like reality. And those thoughts, those automatic thoughts, can become the irrational logic of unhelpful behaviors, including suicide. What I mean by irrational logic is what they do is irrational. It makes their lives and their own lives and other lives of others worse, but it makes sense to them because of what they've come to believe. Now, I'll give you, here's a couple of examples. You know, it's really awful. This is happening to me. I can't stand when that's what's happening to me. I can't take it anymore. I can't go on like this. I have to make it stop. Now, if you're an 80-year-old man with terminal cancer, those are probably all close to being facts. But if you're a 15-year-old kid, those aren't facts. Those are just opinions. But if you believe those, what behavior might thinking and believing those things, what might it seem make sense to somebody to think it makes sense to do? Like suicide, for example, or go into school and start shooting it up. Now, one solution to shame and anxiety is to teach and encourage children and teens to have what we call USA, or unconditional self-acceptance. Now, what it means is choosing to see whatever they think and feel, or say or do, or struggle with, what they have in the past or might in the future, as part of being human and understandable given what their life experiences have been and what they have to deal with at the moment. Now, here's kind of how I explain why we say it's part of being human. I used to ask students, do you think you're the first human being in history to think, feel, say, or do what you do, or struggle with what you do, or to be the first LGBTQ person in history? Do you think you'll be the last? And if you have a lot of company, which we do, what does that suggest about what you think, feel, say, or do? And the answer is it's part of being human. Now, another way to explain what I mean by understandable is I used to ask kids, suppose that on the day you were born, we took 100 other newborns and from that day forward, put them through every single experience you've been through so far. And then what would you think they would think, feel, say, or do at this point in time? Now, chances are many things about human beings are kind of formed to a bell curve, where we'd probably get some kids who might fare better, some would fare worse, but most would probably think, feel, say, and do much the same. Now, another way to explain why it's understandable is the formula nature plus nurture equals personality, where nature represents all those constants about human physical and psychosocial development. And nurture represents a person's life experiences. And personality represents a pattern of thoughts, feelings, and behavior. And that formula is kind of like the A plus B equals C formula we learned probably in 5th grade in algebra, where A is a constant and B is a variable. If A stays the same and you change B, C changes. Well, what we know from experience, different life experience give rise to predictable patterns of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And I think we all instinctively know this from our life experience. When I was a teacher, if a teacher would go to a counselor and complain about a student, very often the counselor would share some personal information about the student that the teacher didn't know about. And as soon as they did, the teacher would go, oh, I didn't know that. Makes a lot of sense. Now I understand why he's the way he is. He's probably doing better than I would do. Now, why is it understandable? Another thing I've always encouraged people to do is imagine we all came with movies of our lives. And people had to watch our entire movies when they meet us. And the question then becomes, would they see the understandable reasons we think, feel, say, and do what we do today? And I think the answer to that is yes. Now, choosing to have unconditional self-acceptance can help reduce the perceived threat to the symbolic self. Now, it can make them more likely to seek and accept help that is available to them and prevent what they think and feel from playing out tragic. Now, there's also unconditional other acceptance, which means you simply choose to see what others think, feel, say, or do, have in the past or might in the future as part of being human, and understandable given what their life experiences have been, which may have been much different than our own. Now, it can be very helpful for teachers, parents, and the peers of children and teenagers to have unconditional other acceptance and let them know it. One of the first things I used to always do when I ran tool time groups for troubled kids was to say, I want you to know something about me. I have something called unconditional other acceptance. And of course, they were like, what's that? And I'd say, and I would explain to it, it means that I choose to look at what you and everyone else think, feel, say, and do as part of being human and understandable, given what your life experience have been. Now, the benefits of having UOA and letting kids know it, you come across as being a safer, less threatening person to be around, which means they're more likely to share their thoughts and feelings and things they struggle with you. And I had kids unload on me all the time. And doing so could literally be life-saving. And if you show them what unconditional other acceptance is like, they're more likely to choose to have unconditional self-acceptance because you modeled it. Now, Matt talked about mindset. Mindset is always key to dealing with children and teenagers if you're a parent of teenagers or if you were a police officer, especially the troubled and troublesome ones. And one of my favorite mindsets has always been that inside every troubled and troublesome child or teenager is someone who just wants the same kind of life they see others having, but just has never figured out how to get that for him or herself. With that mindset, my goal becomes to try to help them find their way because they're struggling. Okay, even if they're a rattlesnake, it makes it hard if they're a rattlesnake, but there's ways to do it. Now, as far as addressing the powerlessness kids feel, children and teenagers, like most people walking the planet, will have what we call an external locus of control. I would hazard to guess that well over 99% of the people on the planet think and talk in a way that demonstrates to have an external locus of control, like, well, that ticks me off, that makes me mad, and so forth. That means they wrongly see what others say and do when it happens as the cause of how they feel. Now, the problem with that is it needlessly puts them at the seeming mercy of what others say and do and their life events. And because of that, they typically end up feeling worse than necessary or helpful, which gives purpose to all kinds of unhealthy behavior, including suicide, drugs, alcohol, tobacco, all kinds of things, overeating. It contributes to their sense of powerlessness because they often end up feeling like a victim, where I can't do anything about this. These things happen to me and there's nothing I can do about it. And here's another way it plays out. They see others as threats and often needlessly will lash out. So that's what's happening with school shooters. We have a lot of school shootings in the United States. Well, those are kids who perceive everyone else as being the cause of how they feel, so they lash out at them. They finally get to a point where they've had enough and then they lash out. And we make it easy for them because we have, I think, almost 400 million guns in this country, more than one a person. Now, and the other thing about having an external locus of control is they miss many opportunities to feel better. Now, so teaching children and teenagers to have an internal locus of control is the most empowering things we can do. Now, just imagine, if what I say is true, 99% of the people or more walking the planet have an external locus of control. We have all this extra motion, we have all this fighting and arguing and conflict. What would happen if we could teach everybody to have an internal locus of control? Now, the best way I suggest to parents and teachers is develop an internal locus of control in yourself first. If you do that, it will help you better appreciate the value in doing that. And then it will also put you in a much better position to teach your children and students how to have one. And honestly, I believe that is the greatest gift you can give your children, is to teach them to have an internal locus of control, which they will no longer be at the mercy or seeming mercy of others and their life events. That's the greatest gift you could give any kid. Now, the way I do it is to teach this formula. And what this formula says is anything that others say or do or that happens is technically just an event in our lives. Now, I would never go up to somebody at a funeral and say, hey, it's just an event. But technically, that loss of someone is just an event in this formula. Now, thoughts, and what it also tells us is thoughts cause feelings, not events. And a person's behavior will tend to follow his feelings toward his life events. And attitude or thought is always the father of behavior. Now, again, this formula is like A plus B equals C, where A is a constant, B is a variable. If A stays the same, if the event stays the same, we change B, or the way what we believe about that event or ourselves, others in life. C changes what we think or what we feel and what we do. Now, there's fact of life, and that's that there's always more than one way to think about or look at anything that happens, no matter how tragic it is. Some ways will make us feel better. Others will make us feel worse. Some ways will make it easier to deal with what we don't like. Others harder. Now, so here's where the power comes from. At that point in the formula, at thoughts, we have this choice. And choice is our real power and control over our emotional destiny. And by emotional destiny, we mean how you're going to feel about ourselves, others, and life in the next seconds, minutes, hours, days, and weeks. Now, the reason we say it's your choice how I want to feel is because the logic to it is this. There's always more than one way to look at anything. So we always have a choice as to how we do. Thoughts cause feelings, not events. Some ways we might choose will make us feel better, others worse. Therefore, it's our choice to a large extent how we're going to feel. Now, if we end up making ourselves feel worse than is helpful or necessary, that's part of being human and understandable given what our life experiences have been. But in the end, no one really upsets us. We upset ourselves. And that's good news. It's not something to be afraid of. Now, the other thing about an internal locus of control is learning what you do and don't have control over. And I used to draw this circle of conflict on the chalkboard. And I actually was old enough to have used chalk at one point. Now they use dry erase boards. But I'd draw this circle on the board. I'd split it into two, and half of it would be you, half would be them. And I'd write that formula around twice. Whatever someone else says or does is just an event for us. We have thoughts about that, feelings. And then we say or do something back, that becomes an event for them. They have thoughts, feelings, and then they say do something back. And that's what I used to call a circle of conflict. This is how conflicts get going and can end up World War III in no time at all. My question always was, which half of the circle do we have control over? And I've never had a kid, even a 14-year-old, ever get this wrong. They look at this, they can see they only control our half of the circle. Now, so some key takeaways from this diagram. We don't and never will control what others choose to think, feel, say, or do. Now, we can influence it, okay? We can try, but we never really control it. A lot of people talk and act as if they do, but they really don't. I think that's the problem with police officers overreacting, because they tend to have an authoritarian mindset where they've spent their whole life thinking that they really can, and not only can, but should, as a police officer, control other people. So at least it's like an accident looking for a place to happen to have that mindset. Now, others can choose to think, feel, say, or do whatever they want to, including about us. We only control what we choose to think, feel, say, or do, including what we think and feel about ourselves. And others can't control what we choose to think about or feel about ourselves unless we let them. Now, the serenity prayer kind of goes with this. Grant me the courage to change things I can, the serenity to accept things I can't change, and the wisdom to know the difference. Now, I created this kind of a spin-off of what I talk about called mental and emotional karate, teaching kids to defend themselves mentally and emotionally against the comments of others or cyber attacks, online attacks. And this is kind of what I call having a black belt in mental and emotional karate, where a kid would have the attitude or his automatic response would be, you can think, feel, say whatever you want to about me. That's your choice. But it's my choice what I think and feel about myself. And you don't get to make those choices for me unless I let you. And I choose not to. I mean, if we could get every kid to that mental place where that's their automatic response, it's kind of like, you know, kids saying sticks and stones will break my bones. It's just kind of like an adult version of it. Now, I want to mention this thing about hurt my feelings, because we hear people saying this a lot, that somebody hurt their feelings. And it's really a nonsensical way to describe things. People do end up feeling hurt very often because of what other people say and do, but you can't hurt feelings. That's nonsensical. And the reason is very simple. Have you ever seen a feeling, an actual feeling? Not what somebody looks like when they have a feeling, but an actual feeling. Well, of course you can, because it's an internal biochemical and neurological event. Have you ever held a feeling in your hand? No. Well, if you can't see a feeling and you can't hold it in your hand, how can you hurt a feeling? And the answer is you can't. Okay. Now, this is, like I mentioned a few seconds ago, when I was a kid, they used to teach us sticks and stones may break your bones, but names will never hurt you. And they used to all say, I'm rubber, you're glue. What you say sticks or bounces off me and sticks to you. There are all kinds of things they used to teach us. Well, today we tell kids words hurt. Well, my question is, which is true? Are we teaching kids the truth, or are we teaching them something that's going to make them more likely to be a victim? And the reason I say that is because plug it into our formula. Names, somebody calling you names or saying something nasty about you is just an event. Hurt is a feeling. Well, what's in between are the thoughts we have about the person and what they're saying or doing. And at that point, we have a choice. Now, so another way to empower kids, besides teaching them to have an internal locus control, which I think is the most important thing, is to teach them and how to become more aware of the ways they choose to think that make them feel worse. And Dr. Ellis did a very great job of simplifying this for people. Now, before I talk about that, though, I just want to mention what emotion is: energy to move. That's why I like to hyphenate it, to emphasize that fact. And it's energy to move to help us deal with perceived threats and to help us get what we want and need. Now, there's three basic ways you can look at anything. You could not care about it. You could sort of not care about it or really not care about it. You could want, prefer, and desire it. Or you could think you need it. It's a necessity and demand. This is what I call a think thermostat. So you could set your thermostat at three different places. Now, I taught kids a bunch of rules. Rule number one was, you have a right to want whatever you want. Now, a lot of times parents will say, no, you shouldn't want that. You're wasting your breath. I stipulate right at the beginning, you have a right to want whatever you want. That's your right as a human being. Now, the mistakes children and teens make, the same mistakes adults make. We think we need things we simply want. We treat simple preferences as necessities, and we start to demand from ourselves, others in life, what we simply desire. Now, the reason that's important is rule number 2. The greater the difference you create between your expectations and reality, the greater the perceived threat will be, and the more emotion you'll generate if or when you don't get what you want, or lose it, or imagine doing either. Now, so by setting your thermostat at need, necessity, and demand, instead of want, preference, or desire, or don't care, you predispose yourself to be angry instead of angry instead of frustrated, irritated, or annoyed, anxious instead of simply concerned, depressed instead of simply sad, and have shame or guilt, which can be very toxic, instead of simple regret and remorse. Now, talk about anger a little bit. Anger tends to come from demands of others. And very often people will use these phrases to start their comments or thoughts, like how dare they, or how dare you, or they have to do what I tell them to, they have to listen to me, or they should do what I tell, they should show me respect. They can't talk to me like that. They shouldn't talk back to a teacher, things like that. Now, the essence of anger, when people get really angry, basically they're saying everyone has to do what I want and be the way I want them to be. And one of the ways we start to challenge some of this is to say, how old does that sound? Well, to anybody who's been around kids, they know that that sounds like a 2 or 3-year-old. I got a 3-year-old right now who talks like that all the time. Yeah, she stamps her foot and says, do that, you got to do that. Well, how old does that sound? Well, by getting angry, we're actually throwing a temper tantrum. Now, anger management, we hear a lot about that. Anger management, in my mind, is a fool's errand, because the reason being, anger is emotional nitroglycerin. Once you get into anger, it's like being the Incredible Hulk and hulking out. The chances of you being able to channel that into some constructive behavior is very unlikely. What you want to strive for instead is anger prevention. And I think any of the big thinkers in our time, Mahatma Gandhi, and all these other people who tried to teach peace, that's basically, don't get angry in the first place, okay? Now, the thing about anger I think is important to remember too, is it gives children and teens a false sense of power, righteousness, permission, and protection. And for many kids who feel powerless, this is like a drug or anabolic steroid, okay? That's why they like being angry, because they don't have to feel all these other feelings they struggle with. As long as I'm angry, I don't have to let you know that I feel scared, or that I'm depressed, or feel ashamed or guilty. Someone once taught me of saying the other side of guilt is resentment. So for example, you go up to an alcoholic and tell them they're drinking too much, they'll probably snap at you. They'll become a rattlesnake and snap out at you, because the other side of guilt is resentment. Their resentment is a sign that they're struggling with guilt and shame. And their way of protecting themselves from that is to strike out with anger. Now, so how do you sell kids on anger prevention? I used to try to suggest that in the getting angry and aggressing against others, verbally or physically, anybody can do that, but that's not real power. You're actually giving away power and control over how you feel to other people by making them responsible for how you feel. And you give them chances to do things to you that you can't do anything about. For example, if I mouth off to a teacher, they can send me down to the office. They can kick me out of school. They can decide how I'm going to spend my time after school. And I can't do anything about that. Real power is being able to choose how you're going to feel and to choose to not get angry. That's real power. Now, to talk about how we challenge and teach kids to challenge this, they all take science classes. And in science classes, they learn about theories and hypotheses. Well, here's what Dr. Albert Ellis used to always suggest. Every thought we have or comment we make is our personal theory about the way we, others in life, are or should be. Now, so then the question becomes, does the evidence from your past life or your everyday life support your theories or hypotheses? Or does it refute them and suggest better alternative ones? And if you look at old film clips of Dr. Ellis, you'll often hear him saying, where's the evidence? Where is your evidence that people have to do what you want them to? And he would do that all the time. He's basically asking you to be like a scientist with your own personal theories and hypotheses. Now, here's a couple examples. Suppose your theory or hypothesis, they have to do what I'm your teacher or a parent. They have to do what I tell them to. They can't talk to me like that. Well, does the evidence of your past or daily life support or refute these theories? Well, we've all had people do things we tell them not to and not do things we ask them to. We've all had people talk to us in ways we don't like. So the evidence suggests these are very good theories. Now, does it suggest alternative ones? For example, no one has to do anything. That's a fact. They can do whatever they want. Those are better theories to live by. Now, the closer your theories and hypotheses match reality, the less emotion you'll generate needlessly and the better mental health you'll enjoy. Now, if the next question I used to always do, another way of challenging people's thoughts is, what's your thinking, a fact or just an opinion? When people disturb themselves needlessly, their thoughts and comments are typically opinions about rather than facts. And the more we think in terms of facts instead of opinions, the more or less disturbable we become, which means the ability to be disturbed by things that happen. Now, for example, here's a couple examples. Opinions, they have to do what I say or they can't talk to me like that. Those are opinions. The facts are they don't have to do anything and they can do whatever they want. If you practice thinking the first way, you're going to disturb yourself about a lot of things. You practice thinking the second way, you're going to find yourself being more accepting of things you have no control over in the first place. Now, the other thing we do is pose simple, direct questions. For example, if somebody said they have to do what I tell them to, I'd say, it'd be nice if they did, but why do they have to? They have to, or you just want them to. They have to, or you just like them to. And if you say they can't talk to me like that, why can't they? They just did. The evidence is right there in front of you that they just did. He just told you off, said something nasty to you. They can't, or you just don't want them to. They can't, or you just wouldn't like them to. Now, what I'm hoping is people will come to the point where they say, no, they don't have to. They don't have to, I just want them to. So you're turning your thermostat down a notch, which makes you less likely to generate needless emotion. They don't have to, I just like them to. They don't have to do anything. My grandfather taught me that a long time ago. He said, you don't have to do nothing. He was Italian. He said, you don't have to do nothing except die and pay taxes. So he was half right. A lot of people don't pay taxes. And the answer to why can't they is they can. They can, I just don't want them to. They can, I just don't like when they do. They can do whatever they want to, just like I can. Now, if you practice and rehearse these ways of questioning and challenging your own thoughts and other people's thoughts, challenging other people is a way to help yourself do it to yourself. If you practice and challenge these questions and answers become automatic. And I always think of it like grammar check when I type things in a Word document, grammar check will let me know I'm doing something wrong. Well, these questions and answers start to become like grammar check on a computer, correcting your thinking automatically. Now, with anxiety and stress tend to come from making demands of self. It can also come from making demands of life. And very often when people are stressed out, you hear them say, I have to do this, I have to do that, I have to get this done today. And then they'll also do the converse. I can't let this happen. I can't let anything go wrong. Well, the questions are very simple. You have to or just want to. You can't or just don't want to. Okay. And the answers are pretty much the same as what we talked about before. Now, we also explain to kids what we call shoulding on yourself, others, and life. Because people often use the verb should or shouldn't. Now, it could just mean, I think it would be a good idea if, like, I think you should, study more. That I could mean, I just think it would be a good idea if you study more. But very often it means should means have to and shouldn't means can't. Now, and shame and guilt tends to come from people shoulding on themselves. Okay. Now, what I hope to try to get kids to do is instead of shoulding on yourself, just simply say, I wish I had done that, or I wish I hadn't done that. Okay, that would be more likely to generate regret and remorse because it narrows the gap between your expectations and reality after an event. Now, people can get into a vicious cycle, and you see kids do this all the time. And very often it's the highest achievers that do this. Before an event, like a sporting competition or a test or some kind of assignment in class, they'll be saying, I have to, and generate all kinds of needless anxiety. Anxiety can impair your performance because when you generate a lot of anxiety, you're plugging into your flight response. And you can have such an overwhelming urge to flee the situation that it's hard to perform at the level you're capable of or want to. So that's how anxiety prepares performance. And then afterwards, if your performance was prepared, you didn't live up to expectations, you're more likely to shoot on yourself and generate shame and guilt instead of just wishing you'd done better or not done something and have regret and remorse. Now, and you often see this cycle in highest achievers, being students or athletes. And I was both a teacher, classroom teacher, but I was also an athletic trainer for a long time. They achieve a lot, but what made them great in the first place ends up starting to destroy them slowly. Okay, you see this with professional athletes. They'll have a great first and second year. They start getting a big contract with a lot of money, and then all of a sudden they start to have injuries and they start to go downhill. And next thing you know, they're gone or they're traded. Okay, now when you do this, anxiety before and shame after, you can start to get to the point where you burn out, where you just lose the zest for something that you used to really enjoy doing before. And it can predispose them to suicide even. A lot of times we have these famous people and athletes and everything take their own lives. It often leads to injury in athletes. You know, as a trainer, I used to see this happen all the time. If nothing else, it's because in their quest to feeling they have to do these things, they have an overuse syndrome, which can predispose them to injury. But I also always believe that when somebody gets an injury, it tends to lower the expectations they have of themselves and other people have of them. So it's a kind of a way of getting themselves out of this pressure cooker. But we don't want kids to have to get injured or to drop out of school and stuff just to deal with this kind of stress. There's other ways to do that. Now, as far as depression, Dr. Ellis used to call depression a quiet temper tantrum. Because basically what people do is they demand that life be different than it is. Like, this shouldn't be happening to me. I shouldn't or have to or can't deal with this. It shouldn't be so hard. It should be easier than it is. If that's your expectations, there's a bigger gap between your expectations and reality. And you're going to be more likely to be depressed. Whereas if you said, I wish this wasn't happening to me, I wish I didn't have to deal with it, I wish it wasn't so hard, I wish it was easier than it is, you're less likely to be depressed. You're still going to have sadness, which may be unavoidable because something has happened. Now, shooting on these are some of the things I used to say and other people say, and some say to themselves about shooting. Shooting on yourself, others in life just makes you feel shitty. That was my one little joke I used to have for kids. Dr. Ellis used to always tell patients, stop shooting on yourself, okay? And others in life, I would add. And sometimes you'll see people wearing shirts after they've been through counseling or therapy, and they'll say, I'm not going to shoot on myself today, because they realize that they've been shooting on themselves and generating a lot of needless anxiety, shame, and guilt. Now, I'll mention loneliness for a second here, because we've heard a lot about loneliness. Right now, they're saying loneliness is a real big problem in teens because of the pandemic and social isolation. Was a very important thing to remember about loneliness. Loneliness doesn't come from being alone. It comes from what you think about being alone. Being alone is just an event in our formula. Loneliness is a feeling. There's a step in between. Now, for example, if you don't care to be with someone and then someone perhaps leaves you, you'll be indifferent to that. But if you want that person, want to be with that person, want that person to be with you, and then you can't be with them or they leave you, you'll have a certain amount of loneliness. But if you think you need to be with that person, perhaps like air, water, and food in your own mind, and then you can't be with them or they leave you, now loneliness becomes much bigger, a much greater frequency, intensity, duration. And that's why we often see these murders, suicides, where someone left someone and then the person that was left will kill them and then kill themselves afterwards. Now, one of the things I think we need to do with kids is really pose this question. What do you really need? Do you need love? Do you need acceptance? Do you need approval? Do you need respect? Do you need friends, a boyfriend or girlfriend? Do you need sex? A lot of people think they need sex. A lot of teenage boys start to think they do. Okay, but do you really need those things like you need air, water, and food? And that's kind of the way I approach it. You need air, water, and food. You'll die in minutes, days, or weeks if you don't get enough air, water, or food. Are you going to die if you don't get all these other things to the level that you would like? Okay, my my uncle was a bachelor for 75 years. He died at 75. I doubt he ever had sex in his entire life. Well, obviously he lived 75 years without sex. So is sex really the same as air, water, and food? I know he would die in 3 minutes if he didn't have air. He lived his entire life without sex. Now, do you need them like you need air, water, and food? Or do you need them, or are they just nice things to have? Now, rule number 3 I used to teach kids is when you start to think you need something you simply want, it can make you do stupid things. And the reason to explain it is very simple. If you were suffocating or drowning, perhaps, what would you be willing to do to get air? And of course, the answer is anything. Anything goes. Okay, so suppose you think you need someone's love just like you need air. And people often do equate things like wants like love, acceptance, approval to air, water, and food in their minds. What would you be willing to do to get that love or keep from losing it? And unfortunately, the answer is the same thing. And that's why people often will do stupid things, because they start to think they need something they simply want. Now, rule number 4, behavior intended to satisfy a perceived need will win out over behavior, tend to win out over behavior intended to satisfy a rational preference. And here's a teenage example. A girl wants to wait until she's married to have sex. In many ways, that could be a rational preference, because a lot of times things go badly when they don't. Her boyfriend wants, maybe even thinks he needs, to have sex right now with her. She thinks she needs his love and can't live without him or his love. And she's afraid that he's going to break up with her if she doesn't do it. That's a perceived need. So what are the odds she'll wait until she's married? Now, another simple health example would be someone wants to quit smoking. Well, that's a rational preference for a lot of reasons. But then they tell themselves and think, I need a cigarette. I can't go a whole day without one. What are the odds that they're going to quit? Very slim. Now, another type of thinking I like to explain to kids is called awfulizing. Now, there are a lot of things in life are unpleasant, inconvenient, uncomfortable. But what people do, they turn their thermostat up to awful. And kids do this all the time, as meaning the worst possible thing that could be happening to me. And you hear this on the news media. One of the problems with 24 hours, 7 days a week, cable news media is that they awfulize. Everybody's competing to have the biggest stories, so they awfulize. They're encouraging people to see everything as awful and terrible and the worst possible thing that could be happening. And everybody's following suit, following along the line. Now, when you set your thermostat think-wise at awful, that predisposes you to be angry instead of frustrated, irritated, or annoyed, anxious instead of being simply concerned, depressed instead of sad, have shame or guilt instead of regret or remorse. Now, the formula for anxiety, awfulizing actually plays a role in anxiety, because what you do when you have anxiety is you catastrophize. First, you imagine something bad happening, and then you tell yourself, if that happens, it'll be awful and terrible, and I won't be able to handle it. And that's how you get anxiety. If you said, so what, who cares, you wouldn't have anxiety. Okay. Now, so the questions we ask here or pose here is it awful or is it just unpleasant to some degree? Is it awful or just inconvenient? Is it awful or just uncomfortable? And hopefully you get people to realize, yeah, right, it's not awful. You're right, it's not awful, it's just unpleasant, just inconvenient, it's just uncomfortable. Now, one of the rules I was taught, which I really like, when someone is awfulizing, the last thing they need is someone agreeing with them. That's something one of my mentors. But see, kids do that with each other all the time. When one kid says, oh, that's really awful that they said that to me, the other kid will probably say, yeah, you're right, it really is awful. That's how they make each other feel worse. They break this rule all the time. Now, we see this happening a lot in America, maybe other countries too, what we call grievance politics. So what a politician basically does is agree with his supporters and voters that you're right to think that's happening, what's happening to you right now is so awful. You have every right to be angry. And that's why we have people storming the Capitol in Washington, D.C. That's called grievance politics. So basically they're breaking that rule. They're agreeing with people who are awfulizing, very often needlessly. Now, rule number 5, you have a right to like or dislike whatever you want to. The mistake people make is to turn their think thermostat from don't like up to can't stand it. And you hear kids say this all the time. I can't stand when a teacher does, I can't stand being in his class. Can't stand this, can't stand that. They do this all the time. And by setting your think thermostat at can't stand, you predispose yourself to be angry instead of frustrated, anxious instead of concerned, depressed instead of sad, and have shame or guilt instead of regret or remorse. Now, so the question we pose is very simple. You can't stand it or just don't like it. Okay, and the answer we hopefully they get to is I can stand it, I just don't like it. I'm not going to die or go crazy. Now, one last type of thinking is called label and damning. We have the right to like or dislike whatever we want to, including someone else's behavior. The mistake people make is to label and damn the person, to condemn the doer instead of his deed. Now, and if you label and damn others, you tend to generate more likely to be angry instead of frustrated, irritated, or annoyed. If you label and damn yourself, you're more likely to generate shame and guilt. Now, the questions we pose are very simple. Why are they or you stupid just because they did that? They're stupid or just did a stupid thing? Because what label and damning is overgeneralization, like calling an apple bad because it has a bruise. And they're stupid or just did something you didn't like. Now, the other thing I think is important to do is teach kids about I messages and you messages. And most people aren't used to separating the way they communicate in these two ways, but it's a very simple concept. Now, encourage children and teens to use I messages instead of you messages. Now, you messages are things like orders, for example, shut up, you is implied, threats, you better or else, okay, put downs, you're stupid, name calling, you're an idiot. Those are you messages. And usually it involves pointing your finger at somebody else. Nobody likes that. I messages simply give others information. For example, what you like or don't like, what you want or don't want, and it leaves it up to them what to do about that, because we really can't control what they think, feel, say, or do. We can try to influence it. That's the best we can do. Now, for example, use phrases like, I don't like when someone talks to me like that. I like it better when people are respectful. I don't want you to talk to me like that. I want you to be more respectful. I'd like you, I'd rather, I'd prefer, I wish, I'd appreciate it if. Now, the other thing I teach kids is a concept called mistaken goals from Rudolf Dreikurs, who's a psychologist, and in the past, I think he's long gone now. Mistaken because they get something out of what they do, but it makes getting what they really want in the long run harder. Now, when I was a kid, I used to hear these sayings all the time. Negative attention is better than none. You're cutting off your nose to spite your face, which means you're trying to get even with somebody else and you're hurting yourself more than anybody else. And you won a battle, but you lost the war. Like I mouthed off to my grandfather, but then he ended up smacking me or something like that afterwards. Okay. Now, Rudolf Dreikurs' model said that he watched kids misbehave in classrooms, and he said when they misbehave, they usually have one or more of these four mistaken goals: attention, power and control, revenge, or avoidance of failure. And I added one: withdrawal, avoidance, relief, because very often people have the mistaken goal of withdrawing from or avoiding unpleasantness in their life and getting relief, like, for example, through alcohol, drugs, dropping out of school, and so forth. And one of the ways I used to deal with discipline in school is when a kid would do something, misbehave in some way, I'd say, I got a question for you. What's your mistaken goal right now? Tell me what's your mistake. I'll give you 10 extra credit points if you can tell me what your mistaken goal is right now. When you raise their level of awareness on that, it's amazing how well it works. Now, I also always encourage kids to ask I got two more slides here. I also encourage kids to ask a couple of simple questions of themselves. One is, what do you really want? These are called, Ellis used to call these functional disputes. Because the second question is, once you identify what you really want, how do you want to feel? What do you want your life to be like? And sometimes they have trouble doing that. So it's very important they bring that into focus, kind of like focusing your camera, really clear focus. Now, then the second question is, how is it working for you to think, feel, say, and do what you do now? Is it making it easier to get what you want or making it harder? And if you keep thinking, feeling, saying, and doing what you do now, will it be easier or harder to get what you want in the future? And the last question I used to ask, for example, a girl who's dating some guy who's really kind of bad news for her, if someone else thinks, feels, says, or does that, are you likely to get what you want from them or with them, to feel the way you'd like to with them? And the answers to these questions is usually obvious. Once you answer the first question, the other question is usually obvious. They just need to be asked. Now, the last thing I think is important to talk to kids about is teach them why change is hard. And the way I always did that is to use the term ruts. Many kids use dirt bikes and ATVs, and they go off-road. And they know that if you practice going down the same place, people create ruts in the road. And those ruts in your brain we create from practicing thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are just like ruts in a road. They're easy to slip into, hard to stay out of, and hard to get out of once you get into them. Ruts make thoughts, feelings, and behaviors automatic. Now that can be a good or bad thing, depending on what thoughts, feelings, and behaviors those ruts lead to. Ruts make opinions seem like facts, givens, or truths, and simple imagination seem like reality. And here's the key point. Once you create ruts in your brain, you can't get rid of them. Now, you can only make new ones by practicing rehearsing new ways of thinking, feeling, and behaving, and hope that those new ruts, it's kind of like a city creating a new street for you to take to work. Hopefully you'll compete with the old ruts for use. But the key point is you can, and more than likely will, slip into your old ruts at some point in the future. And that's part of having unconditional self and other acceptance, is to accept that fact about human nature. We have ruts, people will never get rid of them. They will slip into them even after, like a person may start to smoke again after years of not smoking, because they've got that rut. Once they have a stressful event, they start to reach for a cigarette. Next thing you know, they're smoking 2 packs a day again, because those ruts never go away. And that's all I have. So I'll stop sharing here. How do I do that? Stop share. I got to get my cursor. Where's my cursor at? All right. There you go. Okay. I think I did it. Are we back to normal here?
Yeah, just 2 quick slides to finish off. Feelings matter more than we ever imagined. We'd like to have people realize that it was a big shock to me, and I think most people. Give ourselves permission to feel. That's a big deal, and that's the name of a fantastic book by Mark Brackett, the head of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. Emotional responsibility and an internal locus of control are the key to this whole thing, in my opinion. Notice the small words here. And you are at choice. You get to choose. So choose wisely, choose love, choose peace, choose that this is your opinion, not necessarily a fact, and that you want to, not that you have to. Choose, choose, choose. So, and then please share this stuff with other people, please, because they don't know, and they don't know that they don't know. So please, please share it with other people. Thank you, Ray. Great stuff. Fantastic. I was taking notes like a maniac while you were writing again. And I love your stuff. Yeah, that's all right. I'll deal with that. That's my choice, right? That's my choice. So, Dr. R, you got a question, sir?
Yeah, I would like to share my thoughts. Ray, that is, I absorbed everything because I was paying very close attention to, even though I think that some people were not able to, that's why they left halfway through. And the point is, recently I gave 3 talks. One, the fear of failure, that is EQ4PEACE, fear of loneliness, autophobia, and brainwashing. And when you are talking about external locus, internal locus, Matt, now the social media and all this, the information that is coming to your minds, that is the people, in the form of news or advertisements or opinions and everything, they brainwash and they develop their ruts. Ray, your own expression, their ruts. And once they are brainwashed, it is extremely difficult for them to change, come out of that one. That is what the politicians they do. That is what the cosmetic industry do. All they do is they create ruts. Then they think that I should get this one. I should have this one. I should. If I don't get this one, then it is not going to. So it is, they are all thoroughly brainwashed. And that bully side, that one, I'm going to give a talk soon on bullying. And I'm going to give a talk this week on bullshitting. Bullshitting, then bullying. And when I did Google search, there are more than 700 quotes on bullying. Can you believe that one? More than 700 quotations on bullying and on bullshitting. So this is what is happening. So unfortunately, in Kerala, in my state, suicide, depression, anxiety, and suicide are very, very high. Out of the 29 states, in our state, that is where 20% of these medications for anxiety, depression are sold. And the children, they suffer from feelings of shame. The parents repeatedly inject and put them down when they don't meet the expectations of their parents. And then they think that, okay, they are not good, it is not worth living, they commit suicide. Teenage suicide is also very high, is growing. So these are the points, and the presentation, your talk was very good. I have taken many screenshots of your slides. So
feel free to use them. I'd be glad to come to Kansas and talk if you'd like. So
thank you.
I do it for free too.
All right.
Thank you.
Right.
You know, think about if you think about the parameters I gave, what media and everyone teaches people to do is to be more demanding. Right now, the problem we have in this country, everybody demands that everything be the way they want it to be, politically, ideologically, legally, everything. And then they're more likely to awfulize. Oh God, this is so terrible and awful. Well, we could be in Ukraine right now. This is not terrible and awful. We've got a better life we're living better life than anybody in human history has ever lived, even kings and queens. Even obviously everybody doesn't live at the same level, but we're living better than ever. And they also think I can't stand things that I don't like. And then to label and damn each other. That's the thing political pundits encourage people to do. You know, you're a bleeding heart liberal, or you're a redneck conservative, you know, just stop all that stuff. Or even black and white. That's label and damning. There is no black person walking the street. There's no white person walking the street. We all have different degrees of melanin we produce. There's no pure black, white. It's all overgeneralization and label and damning, and it creates all kinds of problems. Every time you overgeneralize, you create problems. So if you look at some of the parameters we have, and people are blaming each other, everyone else for how they feel, but that makes them susceptible to demagogues like Trump, because he comes along and says, I can fix it all. I alone know how to fix it. That sounds a lot like Jesus Christ saying, I am the way, what is it? I am the truth, the way of the life or something. That's why evangelicals flock to him, because they have an external locus of control. They're always reaching out to something else to make their life better. And not only, you know, that because they blame everybody for how they feel, they also expect someone to, or God or Trump, to make them feel better. It's not the way it works. So
Ray, you are right. That is that off-licing, that grievance politics. That is where that is, make America great again. Hey, now the America, we are all awful. The whole thing is make America great again. MAGA, all those things, everything.
Yeah. So the more you have some simple ways of framing it, though, you can see better what's happening. You know, like I said, people are being more demanding, they're awfulizing, they're doing these basic things. These are what I call the least common denominators. Like when you reduce fractions down to the lowest common denominator, these are the common denominators in all human experience. And that's what Ellis was so brilliant about. There's a saying that genius is looking at what everyone else has looked at and seeing what no one else has seen. And that's how I always think of Ellis. He looked at what people have been looking at for centuries, and he saw things and framed it in a way that's very simple for people to pick up. That's why I think he was a genius. And I don't say that about a lot of people. So.
Well, I like the way you look at things, Ray, and try to explain it to people so that they can actually make shifts in their thinking, their feeling, their everything. So wonderful.
Thank you.
Many people, they don't have that critical thinking skills. That is why they get easily brainwashed by the politicians and everything. So unfortunately, in the schools, they don't teach how to think. The how to think is the one that will protect you, not what to think.
Think about one of the things we used to always hear in the 70s when I was growing up: question everything. Question authority, question what you think, question what other people say and do. Don't just accept it, question it. Why do people have to do what you want? Why can't they do something you don't like? Why does everything have to be the way you want it to be? Why is it so awful? Why can't you stand it? You can't stand it or just don't like, just question. challenge everything. You've got to do that because human beings have a tendency to be irrational. That's human nature. We have a tendency, for example, I always mention these two tendencies, to one, note and attend to differences between us and others, and then to overgeneralize about that. And that's what gives rise to racism and xenophobia and all these other things, because we're focused on something that's very visible. Somebody's got different skin color to me. So what? 99.9% of the things we have in common, starting in our DNA. You know, we're different by a couple genes. You know, somebody's 3 genes on one person make them darker skinned than somebody else. But 99.9% of it is the same. And we all love people. We all want to be loved. We all want families. We want the best for a family. That's no different whether you're an American living here or somebody trying to emigrate to this country or living in Ukraine. You know, and look at Russia. He hasn't learned that lesson. If you attack people, invade a country, they're going to fight. They're not going to relinquish. They're not going to give in. I don't care who it is. How many times do we have to learn this lesson? We learned it in Afghanistan. They learned it in Afghanistan. Now they're making the same mistake again. And why are the Ukrainians winning, basically? Because if you attack people, what would we do if they attacked our country? Would we sit and roll over and play dead? No, we'd fight like hell. We might give up our life for the greater good. And that's human nature. You know, it's just, but oh, well, I'm pontificating here, sorry.
Right.
So thank you. Yolango sir, are you there? Can you hear?
Yeah, I'm available, sir. I really listened, Mr. Ray and Matt. You really made us to enjoy. I will tell you one more thing. I never have equated shameness and anxiety. I am a mindfulness practitioner and preacher even, where I never thought that I used to talk about depression and other side anxiety. Future is anxiety. But today, from your topic or from your teachings, I could understand that shameness also been made to think of anxiety. Really, you made my eyes open on that third area, which I never thought till date. And it's a wonderful topic, rather how to make people to I want, from you to I. That also I really liked it. Every time we say that you don't do it, you don't like this, or you do like this. But when we shift from you to I, the paradigm entirely gets shifted. And the person who really tries to behave or interact with somebody else, rather the interpersonal relationship will get improved. I will say hereafter, I will take a class on you and I, by which our effective communication improves. What the World Health Organization talks about our life skills. Really worthwhile. Who are missed today, as Dr. Venugopal said it, that the people who are not got right to sync with you had lost their link, really lost their thought process even. You made to think a different thinking to me at least. I really salute you, both of you. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
There's a name for that. There's an actual name for the technique. It's called putting your behavior where you want your attitude to be. So talk the way you want to think. And that's what you do in mindfulness a lot. You put your verbal behavior, the way you talk, your meditation, whatever, where you want your attitude to be. Now, but then you always have to realize that you're dealing with old ruts people have, and they're always going to have a tendency to slip into those old ruts. And even after years of doing something a better way, they may slip back into those old ruts. That's part of life.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
You're welcome.
By the way, I like you were talking about question everything. I like this saying, don't believe everything you think, don't believe everything you feel, and don't even believe everything you believe. Question everything, right?
I wanted to say one thing. Matt, when Matt showed that diagram of feelings, and there's that big like circle chart, I saw one word on there that struck me: discouraged. When you think about that, one of my mentors told me that misbehaving kids are discouraged kids. They've lost their courage to try and to, take on challenges because of anxiety and shame. So that discourage, we think what it means difficulty in having courage, discourage. So that's why I like to hyphenate words. A lot of times you realize what words really mean. So misbehaving kids are often discouraged kids. So
that's good.
They are discouraged to speak up. That is the main problem. That is, they are afraid that they will be put down. So they don't voice. And that irrational thought, it keeps on playing again and again in their minds.
when you think about it, Doctor, I bet you and I grew up in an age where people used to say children should be seen and not heard. Well, think about how crazy that is. And you wonder why kids are taking their own lives. Well, we want kids to tell us how they're thinking and feeling so we can challenge it and help them find a better way. And you've got people who grew up like me. I used to hear that all the time. Children should be seen and not heard. What? I mean, that's just, talk about irrational. That's crazy. So.
I hope that you have done a wonderful research on the particular paper by which you could understand the students or youngsters' mind rightly. And how do they feel ashamed, or why do they say that I can't? Why do they say I will? These all things you are rightly, I really love it the way manner you have produced in front of us.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else?
Dr. Revere, also, I put the PowerPoint in the chat, a link to the PowerPoint. So if you need some more screenshots, they'll be available there.
Okay, just a minute. Let me take a look at that. That PowerPoint,
Okay.
that one. Okay, just a minute. Okay, let me take a screenshot.
I combined mine and Ray's.
Okay, just a
Great
minute.
stuff, Ray. You're the man.
Thank you,
Appreciate
man.
it. We're hoping Dr. S has put us on the schedule for the next 4 Saturdays, working through positive mental health for kids, for teens, for adults, for middle age, for aged. So we're going to keep going through the age brackets and see how we can adjust it slightly for each one.
Yeah, just so I
What?
understand, it may start to sound repetitive. And the reason is this:
Yeah.
whenever you try to fix something, whether it be a car or a person's mind, there's only so many tools you can bring to bear. The trick is learning what tools called for at the moment and getting good at using it. So in the next couple of weeks, it may sound like I'm repeating myself a lot, but that's the whole point. There's only so many things we can do, no matter what age level we're dealing with. And a lot of things are very similar to just play out in different ways, but there's only so many tools we can use to try to fix something at a different different age group. The trick is learning what tools called for and getting good at using it. So
Maybe we can do more
Okay,
examples or stories of my age.
Okay, I think everybody is stopped. George, sir. Okay,
Good
okay,
stuff.
thank you, Mr. Matt and Ray. It's a wonderful topic, and
Thanks
it's
for
a
having
wonderful.
for having us, Doctor.
It started from kids. Now we will expect for teens, youth, and similarly for aged and middle-aged people. So you are doing a wonderful job. You are partitioning the same EQ and PMH in a different way. Thank you very much. Anyway, definitely we got this PowerPoint also.
Remember, Doctor, Kansas isn't that far from Colorado.
Yeah, I know.
I can come there, or you can come see fall colors and wildflowers.
Yeah, and why don't you share your telephone number? I'll save that number. Just,
So 815.
just a minute.
Okay.
Well, stop the recording.
Okay, okay, 815.
815-353.
Okay.
5312.
Okay, let me read it back. 815-353-5312.
Got it.
Okay, thank you.
So thank you very much once again, Mr. Matt and Mr. Ray. Thank you for supporting us, particularly in Kerala. We are very poor in EQ as well as this positive mental health. So definitely we will empower, and we are arranging some colleges also. Let me talk with Matt. Maybe possible. We can do it in online. So we'll try that. Today also I have a session
Great.
on women empowerment in Palakkad. That's also in Kerala. So I am on the way. So right now I am in one of my cousin's house. I want to conduct that way. Anyway, thank you once again. Thank you very much. And we will meet next Saturday with the same thing for teens. Isn't it?
Thank you, Dr.
Sounds good.
Pavlovich. Bye.
Okay, thank
Have a
you.
good
Thank you
week.
very much. And good night. See you.
Thank you, Mr. Matt, and thank you, Mr. Ray, for a wonderful program.
Yeah, right. You're welcome. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it. Mhm.
I salute you.
Thank you. Thank you.